And all, this is the Board Executive Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District being held this Friday, April 8, 2022, and we're beginning at 12:36. I'm going to ask our recording secretary, Monique, to take the committee's roll call and then introduce staff that will be participating in this afternoon's committee meeting. And then Monique is going to give us the procedural Brown Act information. So go ahead, Monique. Thank you.
Thank you, President Coffey. This is Monique Salas, recording secretary, taking roll. President Coffey.
Present.
Director Rosario.
Here.
Director Lane.
Here.
Park District staff participating in this meeting include Deputy General Manager Dr. Ana Alvarez, AGM Christina Kelchner, General Counsel Lynn Borgalt, Chief Brian Holt, Chief Robert Kennedy, Assistant Finance Officer Jeff Rasmussen, Ruby Tumber, Edward Willis, Devin Reef. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. Board members and staff may participate via phone video conferencing and/or through a hybrid of in-person and remote attendance. We are providing live video and live streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so, 1, via Zoom, 2, by submitting an email, or 3, leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. If there's no other questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Monique. We'll proceed then directly to item number 2 on our agenda, Board of Directors 2022 Look Ahead Calendar. This is being presented by Dr. Alvarez. Ana?
Yes, thank you so much, Director Coffey, board members. The item before you is an opportunity to understand a new practice that we're bringing into the Park District under the leadership and the request of President Coffey in terms of engaging more with our board members in developing the agendas for the board meetings. The practice in terms of elected official participation in agenda setting had already been in place at the board committee level, and now we're bringing it up to at the board level. And what we're bringing in to the Park District as a new practice is really an opportunity to have a look ahead of potential action items for the 2022 calendar year. And similar to our budget process, staff anticipates conducting a mid-year review to capture any additional or other types of necessary adjustments. And what I want to bring to the board's attention that in establishing this new practice, it's really coming from the clerk of the board's office. And the clerk of the board has contributed by extending support to a very collaborative process under the leadership of our general manager, Sabrina Landreth. And at this time, and with your concurrence, I would like to take a moment to introduce the people behind the process. And I really would like you to see and acknowledge Deborah Fuller, who's here with us. Hi, Deborah. Over there. Because Deborah is a new member of the clerk of the board's office, who is responsible to coordinate this annual look ahead, as well as the monthly look ahead memos with staff representatives from across divisions, and as we partner with our elected officials in preparing for the board agendas. So thank you, Deborah, for waiting. And I think it's important that we understand the people behind the work and take a moment to acknowledge their contributions. As with a new practice, it does require change, and in change management, we're having to get comfortable and find a pace and a practice that speaks to everybody's needs, and this is what we're trying to accomplish here. So at this time, Director Coffey, I would like to share or take a moment to briefly review the business items that are identified in the first ever annual look ahead for 2022 here at the Park District.
Please do.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can follow along. And so this is really on a month-by-month basis. And you can see that in the meeting of January, we only have one meeting in January. So it's really, there's not a lot of volume in terms of business matters, but I would like to highlight that in January, that's the month where we do the rotation of the board officers. or in the event of an election year, the newly elected board members will be sworn in. Moving on to February, you will find that we go back to our regular practice of conducting two public board meetings. And as you can see, the number of items have grown extensively by 28. And this is also a month when we typically bring forward the year in review presentation by our general manager. And this is the month where we have seen, looking back at some patterns, where we see a lot of contracts and contract amendments. So this is the continuation of the body of work to close out the year. And then in the month of March, it is easy to speak to these items because we already done the work. But in the month of March, we have 30 items. And now you start seeing that these little asterisks next to some of the items. And that speaks to firm dates that cannot be changed for regulatory adherence requirements, such as the initiation procedures or proceedings for our landscape and lighting districts in establishing or the notice of intention to establish the landscape and lighting districts. Let's see, going on to April. And you will find that we have seen the patterns in the month of April that we continue to see contract amendments and new contracts, but also we see a large number of grants or the request to authorize to submit or to apply for a specific grant. And while we do seek your authorization to apply for grants throughout the entire year, we find that in the month of this late spring and early fall, when most of the federal and state grants are due. So that's when you will see that big pattern there. In the month of May, I would like to bring to your attention that you notice that in going to July for 2022, you will notice that we have set aside some dates to continue with the board's annual workshops or study sessions. And on May the 16th, we'll be having our land session. So it's the continuation of the workshops that we started in January. We do have a placeholder, and we'll be sending out an email for May the 27th to discuss the board priorities or interest in their specific wards. And we will be confirming that shortly. But if you that is also tentatively scheduled for May. And then going to the month of June, we have a capital goal setting session on June the 23rd that I would like to bring to your attention. And we're doing capitals in 2 phases this year. And on July the 22nd, we're having the projects themselves, the capital improvement projects. So it will be the continuation of a conversation, which is very exciting since the Park District does a very large volume in terms of capital projects that includes not only restorations, but also built infrastructure. And this is an item of great interest to the board that our general manager is shepherding and leading into better firm up those pieces. And on July the 29th, I have a placeholder as well. And I'll be sending an email to the board. In the event that we're not able to hold the May 27 board interest study session, then we certainly will conduct it on July the 29th. And again, we'll be sending communications to the board so that you can set aside those, so that we confirm those dates. And finalizing the study sessions for the year, it will be in the month of October when the ASD will be leading a discussion with the board members on our trails and that trail planning program. The other items that I would like to bring to your attention is, which the board is very familiar with, is the budget process. So you will find that we do bring forward to the board of directors the investment reports bi-quarterly. We also do our fiscal reporting bi-quarterly. But the budget itself, we do have a meeting in November. That will be an evening meeting, a public meeting for the first public hearing. And we hope to pass the budget, the operating budget, in the first meeting of December. We also have very specific firm dates pertaining to the creation or the appointment to a nominating committee for the board officers that should take place in either November or December, so that we can then move forward with the appointment of the future incoming year board officers. And like I said, as you looked at the staff report, the agenda staff report, we don't have everything for the winter months, but we will be populating those months as part of the mid-year review. So that's all it is. It's a look ahead to give you an idea and a flavor. And we will continue to work with our board president and our vice president as we continue the practice of having meetings in advance of the agendas to review the specific information, which we typically do the Mondays before the board meetings. And that concludes my brief presentation, Director Coffey. And we do have staff representative from the various divisions in the event that you have any questions or would like additional information to any of the business items that have been identified in the annual look ahead document. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Anna. Just a housekeeping note. I got a notice on my Zoom screen that my internet connection is unstable. So in the event I freeze or go offline, Director Lane, feel free to take over and keep the meeting going. Just got to be a little cautious about my connection here. I'm going to turn it over to Director Lane and Director Rosario for any comments or questions they may have. I'll just preface that by saying this concept of being presented with the look ahead items basically arose from my experience with the PAC, in which the PAC and its leadership got together with staff toward the end of their year and looked ahead and came up with a list of items that they're either going to carry over and continue working on, or new items. And it really gave me, as a PAC member, a sense of the year to come. And you know, from being on this board for some period of time, you have a good sense of the timing of things we do annually every year, but not a good sense of what's coming down the road. And my final thought was that management must circulate a document like this amongst themselves. So I was hoping that that was true, and I think it was true, and this wouldn't result in creating more work for management, at least overly burdensome work, since something like this was probably circulated anyway. So those were my thoughts behind it, and I appreciate the outcome here on it. So it's very good to have a look at. Director Lane?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting list, and Deborah put it together from all kinds of parts of the district, right? So did the district somewhere have this already, or did she have to create it?
Well, the respective AGMs do have a work plan for their respective divisions. So it's just a matter of compiling the information and creating a place where people felt comfortable, where they can populate the spreadsheet not only for the year, but also the 2-week look ahead. So it's just a matter of coordinating and compiling the information.
Okay, and but they don't necessarily, these aren't necessarily things that will come to our board committees, yes?
Yes, they will. So there are certain items that, for example, the budget is a good example. The budget gets heard at the board finance committee first before it comes to the board members. There are other items that will not come to the board of directors public meetings that are heard at the board committee level, such as a good example of that is at the Natural Cultural Resources Committee. The committee hears the annual integrated pest management report, but that report never comes forward to the full board. So the majority, so all the items that you see here, Director Lane, all these items, some of them may have been heard at a board committee level, and there's some that come directly to the board of directors.
Yeah, so yes, I can see that. I do have a question about, well, you know, we will have board elections this year, of course. And I think we have always been a little fuzzy about exactly when a new board member is officially official. And, you know, we'll have swearing in January and the elections in November. And there's always been this like, well, so when is the new person official? And so I would appreciate knowing that. It wasn't clear to me when I first came on the board, and it's never been clear. So a little clarity on that, aside from people saying, oh, well, when you're sworn in, but you do lots of things before you're sworn in. And so who's out and who's in? And I think there ought to be a better understanding of when that actually happens. And I like having this list. I think it's quite remarkable to have one that we can keep track of. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Director Rosario?
Yeah, I think this list is it's a great idea, and not only just for the board members, but also for the members of the public to look forward to something, and they can plan ahead of time if they want to speak to a particular item. To answer Director Lane's question about board elections, I think that piece is covered in the board operating guidelines. So whenever we get an opportunity to have that workshop to cover the items in the board operating guidelines, that we can tease all that out and get all those details addressed there. But it is in the guidelines, and it's one of the things I wanted to bring up for discussion. But this is a great idea, and I appreciate all the work that went into it. And I know there's a lot of planning at each department, and so it's great that we can get it all in one list. Thank you.
And it gives us the opportunity as board members to think about issues that are important to us and to be able to address any gaping holes in this list. In other words, you know, there's XYZ issue out there I thought was going to come to the board this year, and it doesn't appear on this list. So it is worth looking at and spending some time thinking about the issues we as individual board members have been following closely, and see if they're omitted or there's something very important that should be there. We can then turn to staff and talk about it. So yes.
You know, the other thing that happens with each committee is they do a work plan for the year. And perhaps at some point we might want to indicate in parens which things are part of a work plan for the year and at which committee. For instance, executive or ops.
Right.
Thank you.
Good point. Anna, unless there's anything more from your end, I can move on to the next agenda item. But okay, then, but I do want to ask Monique or look around the room and see if there's any public comment on this item.
I haven't heard from any members of the public. Is there anyone wishing to make a public comment at this time? Please raise your hand.
Okay, I don't see any on my screen, so we'll move on to item 3, former Roddy Ranch Golf Course Planning Project update. Eddie or Devin, who's presenting?
Yes, I'll be presenting.
All right.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, President Coffey and members of the committee. I'm Devin Reef, Principal Planner with the Planning, Trails, and GIS Department at the Park District. We are here with an important milestone in our planning for the former Roddy Ranch Golf Course in Antioch. As you know, this planning process is a very close partnership with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy, and we've been also lucky to have the talents of Restoration Design Group, our consultants on the plan. Now I'll introduce the project manager, Eddie Willis, who's a planner with the Park District, and he has a presentation about the preferred concepts for the future park. Eddie.
Thank you, Devin, and hopefully folks can hear me. Eddie Willis, planner for East Bay Regional Park District. Hello to committee members and staff and folks tuning in online. Everyone can hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to pull up the presentation on my screen. And go to full screen here. All right, I'm very excited to provide an update on the habitat restoration and public access planning for the former Roddy Ranch Golf Course in Antioch. Again, Eddie Willis, planner. And I'll provide an overview of how we got to this point in the project and happy to answer any questions along the way. This exciting milestone that we've reached is we've released the preferred design concept for the former golf course. I'd like to acknowledge our funding and project partners. This is primarily a partnership between the Park District and the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. In 2020, we hired Restoration Design Group as our lead consultants, and they've been working with their staff and their sub-consultants to do a lot of the background work in consultation with the district and the conservancy. And we get further support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Wildlife Conservation Board. The former golf course is nested within the larger future Deer Valley Regional Preserve, which is composed of approximately 3,700 acres of land immediately southeast of Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve and a little northwest of Round Valley Regional Preserve in eastern Contra Costa County. The golf course itself is about 230 acres out of the larger 3,700 acre property and very close to the intersection of Deer Valley and Balfour roads on the Antioch-Brentwood border. The golf course in turn is part of a larger network of open space, which is the East County Habitat Conservancy lands. It's about 14,000 acres of land, including Deer Valley, the land south of Black Diamond, we're calling Clayton Ranch, and quite a bit of land around the Vasco Hills area. And the primary focus of these lands is habitat preservation, conservation, and restoration. And we've partnered with the Conservancy to look at Roddy Ranch Golf Course as one of potentially the first parts of that preserve system to open to the public. A little bit of more recent history from the 1970s at least is that's when Jack and Donna Roddy, the owners of the land on which the golf course sat, purchased and moved to the area, and they were ranchers, and Jack was a former rodeo star. And he saw an opportunity to build a golf course in the early 2000s. Some of you might know there were projections of communities being developed around where the golf course would go. And the golf course was open for about 16 years and closed and was purchased by the district and the Conservancy in 2018. And I wanted to give you all some background on where we are in the planning process. So initially, the land is purchased by our land acquisition department and then turned over to the planning department to begin doing studies and looking at ways that we can gain public access and conduct habitat restoration. So that began in 2020 when we hired Restoration Design Group, and they began with their field studies looking at soils, wildlife, et cetera. And that was compiled into an existing conditions report, which was released to the public in the spring of 2021, about a year ago. And we held a public meeting at that time online, got some initial public feedback. And then that information was turned toward the development of 3 draft concepts of what the future park could be. We got further feedback on that. And we're at the stage where we have developed a preferred concept and are conducting environmental review pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And we anticipate that a final habitat restoration and public access plan may be available for review and acceptance by the board sometime in mid 2022, sometime mid-year. All right, some of the goals of the project are listed here. We've broken them into restoration and recreation. On the restoration side, essentially we want to return the golf course into a natural habitat, restore grasslands, encourage native species, and do various wetland restoration projects. And on the recreation side, we'd like to open it as a regional park, make future connections to nearby black diamond mines, and support a variety of passive recreational opportunities such as hiking, biking, equestrian use, picnicking, and so forth. All right, we will take an aerial view, a short video, cruising over the golf course. And my apologies if the video shows up choppy for anyone watching at home, but this was taken by Restoration Design Group looking over the golf course. You notice some of the former paths below. This is looking east toward Antioch and Brentwood and the Great Valley. This is coming back east over the center of the course toward the parking lot and future staging area. That's at the center of your screen. The old clubhouse is at the bottom left. And finally rising and looking toward the south, toward Mount Diablo and Deer Valley. All right, we have, I've put up on the screen the 3 draft design concepts which were presented publicly last year. And this is an aerial view from some of that same footage, looking out over the staging area to the northwest and toward Black Diamond Mines. And these are posted on the project webpage, and we also have plan views of the maps as well. They have some nuanced differences with trail alignments, and where the restoration features are, but they all have these certain restoration and public access features in common, such as channel improvements, wildlife ponds, accessible multi-use trails, picnic areas, overlooks. So these were presented last year, and we got a variety of feedback from various stakeholders, including public officials, our project staff, and the general public, as well as state and federal wildlife officials. And that information was combined or compiled into a preferred concept. And here we're taking that same perspective view over the golf course, and I will try to zoom in a little bit to highlight some things. So at the bottom center is the future staging area with some trees that could be planted for shade. This dash line and the other dash lines indicate accessible trails. And we have about 1.5 miles of accessible trails. The blue writing indicates restoration areas, including creating vernal pools, wildlife ponds, and generally trying to manage the flow of water at the surface and underground. And the solid lines show, whoops, jumped ahead there. The solid lines show the multi-use trail network. And so here we have a plan view of the same concept. Zoom in once again. I'll highlight just a few areas looking over the staging area at the bottom right. Number 4 indicates dedicated equestrian and bus parking. That was some of the feedback we received, and a dedicated equestrian trail leading from there to the trail network. A picnic area split between an upper and lower section, an interpretive pavilion for providing a little bit of shade, opportunities for environmental education and interpretation. And then we'll zoom out and look at the larger trail network. Solid lines are the multi-use trails. The dashed lines are the accessible trails. And in the center, we've got an overlook, which I'll highlight in one of our renderings. And at the top, we've got the wildlife ponds with 300-foot buffers around them. And we were careful to make sure that the trails didn't impede into those wildlife buffers. Right. And so this is a rendering of the east overlook over that little spur off the accessible loop trail. It's looking south toward Mount Diablo. And this trail network will be open to a variety of users, including folks on foot, folks on wheel, and folks on horseback. And so this is the rendering. And this is the before shot, or as it currently sits. I'll take us to one more rendering looking toward the staging area, the accessible multi-use trail in the foreground, the green, after the winter rains. And the interpretive pavilion is near the center right. And just behind that would be the future picnic area. And then to the far right, that cluster of trees indicates the future staging area. Okay, this is what it may look like in the future. This is what it looks like now. Of course, it is in color in real life. All right, these are some of the next steps and milestones in the planning project. So the checked items are ones that we've completed already. The ones I have in bold are public-facing programs and meetings that we've conducted. 2 public meetings online. Last September, we held an in-person open house event for people to look around the site and ask questions and provide feedback to our planning team. Currently, we have the preferred concept developed and are conducting environmental review. In about a month from now, we're also offering public tours of the site, and those have been announced publicly and are available for sign up online through our reservations department or by calling 888 EB Parks and speaking to reservation staff. And we anticipate that a final plan will be adopted in the summer of 22. And so the preferred concept and the maps, that's all part of the final, those are all steps toward developing a final habitat restoration and public access plan. So that will be the main deliverable from our consultant. I've got my contact information here as well as the project webpage. I'm happy to take any questions or and I can turn it over to some of my colleagues if they want to chime in.
Thank you, Eddie. Director Coffey, if I can.
Yes.
Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails and GIS. First, I just want to thank Devin and Eddie for just really great work and great presentation, Eddie, on this project. I also want to emphasize that this plan has been developed in very close partnership with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy and with Abby Fateman with the Conservancy. She would be here today with us, but she's on vacation this week. But I did want to, emphasize that we've been working closely with her. And then I also just want to highlight something that for us is exciting, is that because we've been working closely with the Conservancy, and we've also been working closely with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is that we've already been able to get their sign off on this preferred concept. So often we develop a plan and then we have to go into the permitting process and go through that. The benefit of this partnership with the Conservancy and sort of working with Fish and Wildlife Service agencies ahead of time is that we've got their support for this concept design. We've worked through a lot of the issues there. And so that really will help us be able to move into the implementation part of this. And I think really emphasizes the good work that Eddie and the team have done to address the environmental concerns on the property and come up with a robust restoration and public access plan. So just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you again, Eddie.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I will look to my colleagues, Director Lane and Director Rosario, for any comments and questions. We have at least one request for public comment on the item, and then we'll bring it to a close. I have a few questions as well. So Dee or Beth?
Thank you very much. I do have some questions, particularly on the trails. And so one of them is if we are putting in additional trails, in addition to what the golf course already had with trails, do we already have permits to do that?
We are not quite at the permitting stage just yet. What we're proposing in this preferred concept is mostly the removal of about 6 miles of existing concrete golf cart paths. And some stretches we'll be able to reuse as part of our accessible trail system. The problem with the golf course cart paths as they exist is they're too steep and have too much cross slope, many sections, to meet outdoor accessibility requirements. And so we'll use some of those alignments for future trails, but we heard from various park users that they don't necessarily want to hike or take their horses on hard surfaces. So we're looking at opening up the landscape into more natural surface trails. As far as permitting, we're not quite at that stage. Of course, Devin or Brian can chime in on that end of the process. I will add that we have about 1.5 miles of accessible loops and about a total of 4 miles of trails. So 1.5 miles of accessible loop and 2.5 miles of natural surface multi-use trails.
So does accessible mean acceptable elevation?
Correct. It means it's using the outdoor accessibility standards, and that's used by a variety of outdoor agencies. And it means that the trails are at more of a gentle grade, so that if someone were in a wheelchair, they could comfortably access those trails, but it doesn't quite meet the stringent standards of ADA accessibilities where you have to have rails and things of that nature.
Okay, but then the remaining trails are somewhat steeper? Is that what is that why they're not described as accessible?
Correct. Yeah, one of the studies was to look at the sort of accessibility of the site and existing steepness of the cart paths. It was really built for golf carts to go up and down, not so much for people to walk on, and certainly folks if they need, if they're on wheels.
Okay, and then in terms of trail use, are we restricting uses on some of these trails? Like you said, an equestrian trail, is that going to be only equestrian? So maybe you should show me the map again of the trails, which is very
Sure.
nice
And Brian,
map.
it sounded like maybe you wanted
Yeah.
to.
No, go ahead, Eddie. Go ahead. You can show the map, and then I'll just. Yeah, go ahead and pop up the map there.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, and I'll try to do full screen here. Oops. Let's go back. Okay, and just let me know if you'd like me to zoom in on any particular spots.
So, so Beverly, by and large, the trails are proposed as multi-use trails, and we're not necessarily proposing to restrict any uses through here. Part of the thinking there is just because of the open grassland nature of this site, that it can accommodate multi-use. You'll be able to see other users in a way that you wouldn't necessarily experience the trail conflict that perhaps we've heard about in other places. So these have all been designed to be multi-use. Of course, that's ultimately up to the board's discretion, but that has been the intent as we've been going through the design, as we've been thinking about it.
So, So they're primarily multi-use because there are not a lot of trees in the way from visually being able to see what is happening and what's the width of the trails.
That's correct. Eddie, you could speak to the width. But of course, when we originally bought the golf course, the idea was, the thought was, well, there's all these existing cart paths that go through here, and we can reuse this existing network. For the reason that Eddie described, those cart paths will be removed, and we will have these purpose-built trails. We'll be building trails through here, and the thought is that because the site is so visible, that they will be able to accommodate multi-use. And the trails through here are designed to be how wide, Eddie?
I believe to conform to the outdoor accessibility standards, we're anticipating the accessible loop, which is those two loop trails closest to the staging area, will be 8 feet wide. And we are also looking or considering the outermost loop trail at being 8 feet, but that the interior connecting trails that are non-accessible will be a 4-foot width.
And so part of that, again, this is by and large a restoration project. This is a project from the Conservancy. We're converting an old golf course, right? So we want to minimize our footprint in terms of habitat impacts. So the resource agencies have very much an interest of that trail width question. They don't want to see, necessarily 8-foot wide roads through here. They want to see sort of smaller footprint trails. So that's been part of the discussion as well, is sort of limiting our footprint there. And I do want to go back. You asked Director Lane a question about permitting. Because this is a Conservancy project, we are covered under the Conservancy's permits for California Department of Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, this is the permitting process.
Okay, so are we planning on planting more trees in addition to the ones we're doing in the parking lot?
That's a great question, and we certainly have heard that interest from various stakeholders. The site receives about 13 inches of rain annually, which is just above desert classification. So it's not by any means a very moist site. There are some trees on site, but it's at best an open oak savanna. These dark areas that I've got the little hand icon over here and up by the restoration ponds could be some replantings, certainly down by the parking lot. But we don't anticipate that, or we don't believe that the site would really support any sizable amounts of trees. It's a very short, very small watershed. The bottom of the golf course is basically the top of the watershed, so it doesn't hold a ton of moisture throughout the year with the limited rainfall we receive. So we're really emphasizing grassland habitat at the edge of the valley. If you go further west into Deer Valley proper and higher elevations, there is a pretty sizable amount of native blue oaks and other trees, but we don't see them so much at these lower elevations below 500 feet.
Okay. Okay. I think it's very exciting, the speed with which we have moved on this plan.
It feels, yeah, feels like it's the years are
You
flying
know
by.
what I mean, yes. And thank you for your presentation.
Director Rosario.
Thank you. My only questions are on kind of follow up to Bev's questions regarding the interior trail, 4-foot width to be shared with all 3 or 4 groups seems a bit narrow. what is, even with the good line of sight, is there going to be, I'm wondering if there's going to be adequate turnoff spots or, and if there isn't, I mean, is there a possibility of having that trail a little bit, even 6 foot versus 4? To allow for some kind of passing between user groups?
Thank you, Director Rosario. I think that is still somewhat negotiable. We have heard from our trails crew. We've talked to equestrian cyclists and conservationists, and as well as our landscape architects and design team. And we don't think that everyone's going to be happy with every trail width. We've heard, suggestions of having 12-foot wide trails even to sort of consolidate users into, one larger trail. So we don't know for sure how well that would work. As Brian mentioned, there are really good sight lines there. It's such an open landscape. We don't anticipate much in the way of trail user conflicts, but I'd love Brian or Devin if they want to chime in.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, we have professional trail designers on the team. This has been evaluated. Certainly, we've looked at it. I mean, obviously, we're very attuned to the trail conflict discussion, as we've heard. I just in practice, I think the idea that you're going to have all the trail users convening at the same place on the trail at the same time is rare. And if that were to happen, it would simply be a matter of just stepping off of the trail. This isn't a topography necessarily that you're going to see, the sort of the high-speed downhill mountain biking types of things. It doesn't lend itself to that same sort of thing. So I just don't think that you're going to see those same sorts of challenges. And for folks who are concerned about trail conflict, there are the 8-foot wide trails. I mean, there are the perimeter trails that you're able to stay there. So it's also a bit of a choice in terms of, I guess, the level of, I don't want to say that any of them would be risky, because I don't think they would be, but if you were concerned about the trail width, you could stay on the 8-foot wide trail. And I would just further say, I think, some of the challenges regarding just creating the different sort of operational burdens of how you restrict access on the different trail uses would, we want to make sure that that folks are able to, circulate around in here, that there's not a mixed bag of rules, that there's sort of, it's clear where they could go. So I think, our team has looked at it closely, and I think we're pretty confident in the current network.
Okay, I just want to make sure that where there's opportunities to develop passing lanes or turnouts so that people can pass, that we do so. So thank you.
I think we can certainly take that and go look at if there are places where there perhaps are some concerns, that we can certainly put those in there.
Okay, thank you. Well done, though. Good presentation, and it sounds like we're headed in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. My belief is that if each of us were given the opportunity to plan the trails for ourselves, for our own use, we'd each come up with different widths and different layouts and such, because it really is something you have to customize. There are topographies and geographies that, and I've done a lot of this lately, going to parks over in Marin or Joaquin Miller, and where it's a free-for-all between bikers and people. And I've physically measured with the iPhone device the width of the various trails that are multi-use, and weighed that against my comfort level being on that trail. So I've tried to get a thought in mind for how wide does a dirt trail have to be for me to comfortably hike on it. And then it is that question in turn is one of sightlines and grade and tranquility. Are, you know, is this a heavily canopied trail in a forest, you know, with a lot of twists and turns and grade changes where you just don't want to share it with a bicycle. It's too disruptive and potentially harmful to mix. But if you're in a grassland with great sight lines, and I've hiked quite a bit out on this golf course at this point and using the existing golf cart paths, and it has wonderful, you can see everywhere around you. It's a very open grasslands. But I do agree with Director Rosario that 4 feet is going to be problematic if there are a lot of people and bicycles coming by, unless you have an effective shoulder that, you know, maybe you're not qualifying as trail space, but we all know that many bicyclists don't actually yield to people. People yield to the bicycles. And that's where D is dead on. You just have to have a shoulder, a significant shoulder to be able to get out there. So I guess, you know, when I do my measuring, I've often thought I feel comfortable with open sight lines where there's a 5-foot width. You know, so as I said, these might be 6 feet, Bev's might be 8 feet. I'm kind of comfortable around 5 feet if there are open sight lines. And that's been my experience in testing out all these trails over in Marin. In any event, that's just my comments. I think you do have need for significant shade devices, whatever we all do for shades in the picnic areas, because that's just, it's hot. More often it's hot out there than otherwise. And to be attractive for picnicking, you're going to have really good shade. And the other comment is, I think I saw on the map a number with an arrow pointing toward Empire Mine Road. And as you planners have heard from me constantly, is there's got to be a means of connecting to Empire Mine Road. I understand that Empire Mine Road's legal status now is kind of fuzzy. And so you're not going to write in access to it at a reasonable point. But this park has to be accessible by bike and pedestrian access via Empire Mine Road. I am assured by city management in Antioch and leadership to council members that there is no likelihood that Empire Mine Road will be reopened. Therefore, it will give access to many people and their bikes if you can get into this park through Empire Mine Road and not have to visit, you know, otherwise the only way to get there is to drive there. You don't want people biking on Deer Valley Road, which is narrow and heavy traffic and people are going fast. So we really do have to plan for access to Empire Mine Road. And with that, I'll move on unless you guys want to comment on anything I said. I'm looking at Brian and Eddie.
Yeah, regarding your last comment, we certainly agree, and we've considered that, and at the right time, and when able to, there will be access from Empire Mine Road. As you mentioned, there's some questions about the legal status of that road that sort of impacts our ability to show things, but when that's cleared up, there will be access.
Yeah, and in turn, Empire Mine Road is the trailhead for, what is it, Star Mine Trail? So that'll be the main trail going into Black Diamond from the area. So you know, I know there are long-term plans to create trails into Black Diamond from the golf course, but in the interim, you could get from the golf course on Empire Mine Road to Black Diamond through using Star Mine, which is currently land bank, but people are using it, you know, unfortunately. But that's part of the planning, I suppose. We have two members of the public who have expressed interest in making public comment statements. That is Norm. I think I saw Norman. Norman LaForce is here, and Jim Hansen. So Norman, why don't you go first? Monique, are there any others?
No, not at this time.
Okay, and what's the time we give for public comments? 3 minutes?
3 minutes, correct.
Okay. Thank you. Norman?
Yeah, thank you. Norman LaForce, I'm here speaking on behalf of Sierra Club. And we certainly welcome the opportunity for Roddy Ranch to be opened up. It's another great park to open up, and we welcome that. So my comment should not be taken in any way as being critical of the fact that this is going to be opened up as a new East Bay Regional Park. I think the biggest concern we have is the issue of the narrow trails for multi-use. And while this park in particular lends itself to maybe having multi-use trails because it's an open grassland area and much easier for, as Director Coffey has pointed out and the other directors, easy sight lines and abilities to see and move to the side without problems. The concern we have is that the Park District is planning this park and other parks with LUPs and LUPAs with all multi-use trails, despite the fact that this has been an ongoing controversy for some time now. It's been 5 years. 5 years ago, the Sierra Club raised this issue about how to resolve this issue, this conflict, and we're still not there. In the TWIG Trail User Working Group process, the survey of TWIG members was essentially 62% were opposed to multi-use narrow trails. That's the TWIG survey, okay? So we're very concerned that the Park District, while it says we're not going to be planning all trails, narrow trails be multi-use, nevertheless, the practice is that's what's going on. And this really needs to be done through a process of working through what now with the TWIG disbanded, the PAC and a master plan for trails, rather than this piecemeal approach where multi-use trails continue to be planned despite the fact this is a major conflict issue. I have to say that a 4 foot wide trail is way too narrow. Even 8 foot is much too narrow, even with the great sight lines that this park would have. But the bigger issue here for this park is that once these trails are put in, there's going to be demand to connect them to other parkland areas, habitat areas where the multi-use is to be restricted. But the demand's going to be for connectivity and being able to have access. And how that's going to be worked out is, to me, very difficult to figure out, because there'll be a huge demand, as we've seen in the past, to have all these trails connected for multi-use. I would have to say that while the area of Roddy Ranch is not one that lends itself to bicycles going downhill at fast speeds, nevertheless, because it's relatively flat, I suspect a lot of bicyclists will love to go fast on a flat road.
Norman, if you could please wrap up. Thank you.
That also has much enjoyment for people. So this is an issue that we're going to be very concerned about with regard to the continued planning of multi-use trails in parks, despite the fact that this is a major conflict issue with the Park District. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Jim?
Thank you, Chair Coffey and Director Lane and Director Rosario. I thank you for bringing up these questions. I also want to talk about the trails issue, because it is the way that we all connect, most of us connect with the parks. Let me just say too that I appreciate the public opportunities to participate in the 2 Zoom meetings, also the open house and the one coming up. And I think I want to comment on those, because what we did here was, particularly in the second online Zoom meeting, was a lot of people wanted to walk out there. And I think the whole point that unfortunately we never really got to in the Trail Users Working Group, even though it was a year and a half, and really wanted to, but I think still need to, as you know, we think that larger scale planning is needed on the trails, is we've had Ordinance 38, which says mainly that we recognize that a narrow space fits so many people. Having walked out there also, in addition to hearing the comments from the public, with another member of the public, on the golf cart path, which I believe is 8 feet. I didn't use my phone, but I kind of measured it with the old foot method. And you can walk comfortably side to side. And I was just looking up my landscape architecture standards manual, but at least a 3 foot, in some cases 4 foot width per person if you want to walk side by side. So I think the point is that if I'm on a bike, I do like to go fast, and most people do. And what we heard in the Trail Users Working Group is this wasn't working for the bikers, and it wasn't working for the hikers. So I'm a little stymied because I know that a wider trail, even if it was a portion that most people used, such as to a view lookout when you had your cousin visiting or something, could be wider. And also that a narrow trail, and some of them do go downhill quite a bit. There's a downhill to the hills there. So I'm not seeing, honestly, in the design, some of the issues and some of the questions and concerns in the trail width and design. And this is showing up in other plans. And I think the public is really keen to see a solution. So I'm just kind of this is initial response. I also do think the trail width should be shown on the plans that go to the public, even the conceptual ones. It's the only way to really, the public really knows what's going on, because you don't want to see it at the last minute in a draft LUPA. You go, what? So anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to comment. This remains a very important issue for designing our parks moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm feeling appreciative of the opportunity to customize trails, and I look to our master plan to the extent it extensively gives guidance on trails and what we look for in trails and design of trails, and then we customize, and we should be, and the plan should incorporate a trail width. I agree with you on that one, Jim. Yes, Director Lane, thank you.
Yeah, the other thing that occurs to me in looking at trails coming out of the parking lot is that one of the things that we have done in the past is looked for short loop trails and labeled them as such, not necessarily restricting the use. Is that one like little inner loop trail that comes from the parking lot? Would that fit our description of a short loop trail with elevations that are not that high? And has anybody really talked about the possibility of taking a trail like that and dedicating it only to pedestrians?
To answer your question about the length of that trail, the innermost loop on the concept map is about 1/2 mile. And if you wanted to do the full accessible loop, which is at that more gentle grade, that's about 1.5 miles. So it's 2 loops sort of nested, the smaller one nested within the larger one. I don't believe we've considered making that pedestrian only. Certainly something we could discuss among the project team, but I don't think that particular topic came up, making that one closest to the parking lot pedestrian only. I'm happy if Devin or Brian wants to weigh in on that.
I've got nothing more to add. I think, yeah, Eddie, that's your correct response. I think, it is something that we could go back and we could take a look at. I'd want to have some more information about the ability to be able to do that and the ability, what that does from an operations point of view. But we could take a look at that.
Okay,
Yeah,
my
I wonder if you would do that, because there's definitely a population that doesn't go that far and that
Yeah.
really appreciates the opportunity to have a single-use trail. And we are beginning to try some pilot programs with dedicated use on trails. And since this is a new park, I think we ought to really have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I would say I would love to explore perhaps some design strategies that would, say, discourage other uses and encourage pedestrian use only. I am having had a lot of conversations with our public safety team and others, would be very interested and concerned about setting up some enforcement challenges for them. So I think if there are design strategies that we can use, I think we'll go back and take a look at that signage and other things. I think that we would want that we could talk about in plain.
Yeah, I'm just remembering a couple of people who used to call me about Iron Horse Trail and say, I'm a little unsteady on my feet now, and it really bothers me to have people go by me that fast, etc. And we had committed in the 2013 master plan to looking at this as an option for trails, to have dedicated, some trails dedicated for a single use. And, the advantage of these little small loop trails, which I think a half mile is pretty small, is that you can have strollers and you can have elderly, and they'll feel like they'll feel safer being out there using those trails.
Thank you, Bev. Brian?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to move on to the fourth item, but I did want to ask one more question, and that is, before this preferred plan gets to the full board for approval, are there going to be other public meetings at which there can be more public input? Or is the public input part of this going to remain with our board meetings?
Well, as Eddie mentioned, he's leading a public tour, and certainly comments would be welcome through there. We accept and consider comments all the time throughout the process. So Eddie's email was up on there, and he will accept and take in any additional comments. We've had the current community meetings, and then of course this is an informational item right now. So we will move into our standard sort of approval process, which does involve the Park Advisory Committee, and then back to the Executive Committee and the board. So there should be ample opportunities for community input.
Sure. All righty. Good to hear. All right, so let's move to item 4, facility improvements related to wildfire smoke events. Robert Kennedy and Jeff Rasmussen.
Thank you for being here, Eddie.
Director Coffey, if I may, as Robert is getting ready to present, I just want to acknowledge that he's completing his 1-year anniversary with the Park District, and he came in full running to take on very challenging and very important projects on behalf of safety for our employees. And this is one of the items that he's bringing forward to the Board Executive Committee meeting. So welcome, Robert.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Executive Committee members, Chair Coffey, DGM, Dr. Alvarez. I'm Robert Kennedy, Chief of Mast, and I'm here to talk about facility improvements related to wildfire smoke events. Actually, I should talk about the team. So our working group consists of Dr. Alvarez, Richard Guess, Jeff Rasmussen, Humberto Gonzalez, and myself. And as a reference, AQI is the EPA's index for reporting air quality. So, and you can think of it as a yardstick that runs from 0 to 500. And the higher the AQI value, the greater the level of air pollution and the greater the health concern. And for example, an AQI value of 50 and below would be representational of a good AQI and air quality, while a value of over 300 would represent hazardous air quality. And back in March 10th, 2021, we received a proposal from Canyon Consulting for MEP engineering services, where they will be providing evaluation and design engineering services for 25 Park District locations as it related to wildfire smoke events. So these 25 sites were selected based on geography and capacity so that staff would have a retreat during high-level AQI events. 11 facilities have been evaluated at 9 different park sites, with 14 remaining. And you can see in the map, we've got a clear spread of park locations so that based on wherever the AQI event is happening, staff can easily drive to those locations and have those accommodations at their fingertips. So this is an example of a site visit by our consultant where the industrial hygienist assesses the facility's compliance with Cal OSHA's rules related to wildfire events and AQI. And the assessments include a review of staffing and operations at each of the facilities, the building envelope, and the existing ventilation and HVAC systems. And as a result, Canyon Consulting will be preparing construction and specification plans to close or seal up building envelopes to prepare for wildfire smoke events and prevent smoke from entering those facilities. Canyon Consulting will also be preparing construction specification plans to upgrade the HVAC systems and preparing specifications for the buildings without existing HVAC systems to filter the air and improve the indoor air quality to meet Cal OSHA standards. And during one of our assessments, it was recommended that we move to a MERV 13 filter, but as you can see, we're actually already utilizing those filters now. So we're ahead of the curve. So we're doing a lot for our staff at our local facilities. And so here's an example of the deliverables that we'll be receiving from Canyon Consulting Engineering. These are building evaluations with recommendations for each of the facilities, which consist of, but not limited to, recommendations for HVAC renovations and or replacements, door and window seal improvements and or replacements, and then recommendations for facility operations during an elevated AQI event. This specific example here at Black Diamond was really tricky because it consisted of 5 different locations that needed to be evaluated. They're all up in age, so there was a lot of work. So there's lead and asbestos mitigation that's present. All the windows and doors needed to be evaluated, and recommendations have been to replace those. And the majority of the HVAC systems needed to be upgraded and or replaced. And we're looking at a bill of upwards of $100,000. And so this just illustrates the need for future funding mechanism so that as we move further into this, we'll be able to plan for it and make those improvements district-wide. And not to forget, the facilities aren't the only thing that we've been doing in this time frame. And so back in September of 2021, I brought the vehicle safety filtration devices to the district, where we evaluated 482 vehicles. And we actually selected the IQ Air, which actually suited our needs in the district. And in a real world fire event near the Caldor fire, where the AQI was over 348. The IQ Air was able to bring the indoor air quality down to moderate levels between 50 and 100, which is excellent. And it did in a very quick amount of time as well. And timing is everything, right? So just yesterday, Jason McChrystal, our fleet manager, sent out a district-wide email related to the distribution of the remaining 150 filters. And so Central Stores is going to be distributing those 150 remaining air filters throughout the district in the coming 2 weeks. And there's also a laminated users template for instructions on how to install the filter unit, and then also how to maintain the system and change out the filters. And so I just wanted to say in closing that, you know, the district is meeting its Cal OSHA requirements by not only supplying these filters, but, you know, providing every individual with an N95 mask during a wildfire smoke event. And so these are just the next steps that we're taking to ensure staff safety and to be leaders and be the example for other public agencies to follow. Because, you know, we were in contact with 50 different public agencies. We talked to a lot of our consultants in the area, or colleagues in the area, and nobody's really doing this. And so we put ourselves out there to be a model for other public agencies to respond and how they can respond during wildfire events. And with that, if you have any additional questions, I'll be ready to take them for you.
Thank you, Robert. Director Rosario.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. So how many buildings have been retrofitted so far? So far, we've taken on the project at Black Diamond. We've finished Trudeau, and then we're in the process of completing Redwood Park offices and Lake Chabot Park offices. And so that leaves how many left to do? Oh, we still have, was that 4? So we've got 21 to complete. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and hopefully we can get those done before the next fire season's already upon us, seems like. So the soonest we can get those done, the better. But I really appreciate our efforts in doing this. Yeah, what this is illustrating is that there's a need to upgrade facilities. You know, we were budgeted to do the assessments. And so the major maintenance funds that I have in my budget, along with some remaining funds that were associated to wildfire events, we're utilizing. And so as we progress through those assessments and see what's needed, I imagine I'll be coming back to the board to ask for some funds to be able to complete these projects. And I just wanted to point out the installation of those vehicle filtration devices as a refuge for staff should an event happen in the coming months. Yeah. And outside of this, probably for Dr. Alvarez, so what do we have a policy for if when we get we have a hazardous AQI for staff? Do we require them to shelter in place or shelter in their vehicles or?
Yes, thank you, Director Rosario. We do have a policy in place that's consistent with Cal OSHA. We also have provided extensive training. All of the employees are required. It's a requirement to be trained on how to respond to a wildfire event. And in addition to that, we have put in place protocols and being able to extend different alternatives on how to report, monitor, and track the air quality, given the large jurisdiction of the park district. So all those pieces and resources have been put in place. And we have, you know, just to give you an idea, in 2020 was the perfect storm, because not only were we responding to the pandemic, we were also experiencing the worst air quality in the history of the Bay Area. And that's when Cal OSHA came out with its specific regulations and new policy. At that point, we were, because of the COVID protocols, we couldn't ask people to take refuge in the vehicles because they were not allowed to be within less than 6 feet of distance. Now we have, but we did have N95 and KA95 masks and other respirators. But it was challenging.
Yeah.
And I can say with confidence and looking back with a lot of pride that the Park District did its best to protect the safety of its employees far and beyond what I've seen in other public agencies. And so I was very excited to see that not only were we responding in real time, but we were also planning ahead for future wildfire events. And this is the work that you see here today. There's over 78 park facilities throughout the Park District, and it's such an enormous task and a very expensive proposition to rehab all those buildings. But I appreciate the team's effort in identifying the key, prioritizing those facilities and identify the key locations within the 4 quadrants or the 4 metro areas of the Park District where people can take shelter. And one of the things that Robert could have mentioned, a lovely presentation, is that in identifying those facilities, we did do an overlay on the fire maps to understand the fire history so that we can prioritize those facilities where we needed to understand where we needed the most refuge based on fire history. So
Right.
that was very good work by the staff.
Excellent, thank you.
I think I gave you more than what you were asking for.
Director Lane?
So do we have this all budgeted? And what's the least amount you have spent on the 3 that you've completed, 3 buildings?
So the budget we have is for the assessment. And so we were given $150,000 for that assessment. And so far, the renovations that we're able to conduct at Redwood and Anthony Chabot are going to be within my 553 account. So we're going to be taking that on. So that's something that we can do in-house.
Okay, because, when you're talking about the Black Diamond, the small buildings
Correct.
that are headquarters now, I can only imagine how porous
Yeah.
those buildings are. So in terms of protecting the air inside, it would be extraordinary work. So-
Yeah, that one's proving to be the most challenging one. And we had our project coordinator, Humberto Gonzalez, working on that with Canyon Consulting. And he's actually going to be contracting out for that one to be able to get the majority of that work done because it's so extensive, because it's windows, lead and asbestos abatement, and like full-on renovations of the HVAC system. And we do have the money available for that right now. So that's not something that we have to come to the board for approval. But moving forward beyond that, yes, I will be coming back once we have final assessments and we start to evaluate what those costs are going to be.
Well, and what about, like the Great House portal and the museum under there, underground? Are we addressing that as well in Black Diamond?
Those aren't going to be considered places of refuge for staff. We are looking at park offices where the majority of staff are going to be congregating. And then we're taking into consideration the capacity to be able to house and create a place of refuge for staff. And again, this is a conversation I've been having with a number of colleagues, is we're not trying to create a hermetically sealed building envelope, because the buildings do have to breathe a little bit. We have to be able to condition and filter that air during these events. And so the recommendations that we're getting from Canyon Consulting is giving us instructions on how to close dampers, seal windows, and ensure that not as much smoke is getting into a building during these events. And so recommendations we've received are to turn off bathroom vent fans and also the kitchen hood fans, because if those are turned on, you're creating a positive air pressure within the building, which means you're drawing more air in. And we want to create a negative pressure, so we want to force air out. And so that's why we're having these evaluations done at Trudeau. That was pretty simple, although we had to put a mechanical mechanism in place to close the damper because the windows and door seals were in really good shape. So we didn't have to address those, but we wanted to create a mechanism so that when an AQI event did occur, we can flip a switch, that damper closes, and it's just recirculating and conditioning the air within the building, and then also passing it through the MERV 13 filters.
Okay, thank you very much for your
No problem.
presentation, Robert.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to management, Robert, and management generally for prioritizing this. It's very important to us, and it's going to be a good thing, Anna, if the whole team can look back with pride on what we've done. So that would be a very good thing, and I will share it. Anything more on item 4? Any more questions? I don't see any public left. So I don't think there are any public comments on item 4. So we can move to item 5, which is the same issue of whether there's any public or any public comment. We did receive an email that was distributed from a constituent who was supporting one of the Jewel Lake options. So I don't see that person here. So we are just about ready for adjournment. First, I'll ask my colleagues under committee comments. Are there any general director comments, Dee or Beth?
I just wanted to say I appreciate all the reports today, and
Yes.
I know a lot of work goes into it, and I really looking at the list of the projected projects up ahead. I'm really appreciating the amount of work that not only each department's doing, but we as a whole, or as a park district, are doing. So I really like that. And thank you for the event yesterday, the employee recognition events. I've been to 2. They've been wonderful. And thanks to Monique and Mary and all the other women that were setting that up and setting it back down. So wonderful events. Thank you.
They are, and our people are really appreciative of them. It's really interesting to be able to attend those. I'm glad as well that I'm able to do that. Beverly, any closing thoughts?
Just to say, I always like being brought up to date on land use plan progress. Thanks.
There's a lot of work that goes into these meetings. So we will adjourn unless, Anna, you get general manager comments today.
Yes, thank you, Director Coffey. I do want to say thank you so much for the accolades. Staff have been working very hard to ensure that the coffee events are meaningful. And I think that what makes them so special is not only the opportunity to visit with one another, but the board participation. I think that is highly noticeable and appreciated by staff to be able to visit with our board, with our elected officials, and for you to be involved in the program. So that's quite a departure from the past, which we all are embracing and appreciating. The other piece is that I wanted to make note to Director Lane's comment that in the mid-year review for the annual look ahead, we will certainly identify those items that will be going to committees. But I also would like to extend the opportunity to the board. If you see in reviewing that document specific items that you really want to make sure that they go to the board executive committee or the natural resources committee or the finance committee, please let us know. Because while there might be a historical practice of going straight to the board, we would like to make sure that we're following a path that is comfortable to you in terms of your decision-making and board actions.
Good idea.
And then lastly, Director Coffey, I sent you a text, and I'm sorry I'm texting you in a public meeting, but yesterday was a special day. And I wanted to know if you wanted to close today's board executive committee meeting by expressing belated happy birthday wishes to Director Rosario. Yesterday was his birthday. And we were together at Dick Chabot, and I was remiss not to congratulate him. So if you wanted to do that.
We can do that. I did get a chance to wish him happy birthday yesterday. For me personally, but we will close the meeting with thoughts of Dee and his birthday in mind. And I especially want to thank Monique and Deborah and Sandra for making this meeting work. It went well and everything smoothly. So thank you to those folks as well. So with that, we're adjourned. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you for the birthday wishes.
Bye.